Pei Amud Aleph, 9 lines from the top. We learned in the Mishnah that if a person wants to be mezakeh for the other members of the residents of the Movei, the food that's going to be used for the shlit mevois, he is mezakeh to them. He uses al yedei a shaliach, someone who can be mezakeh a gadol, a yid that's a gadol. He's mezakeh in order to have finalize the transfer. There has to be a zikui. He has to make a formal type of zikui to them, and so that they can acquire that right, the right to it, the ownership right in it, and they're considered to be joined together in the shlit mevois. That's what our Mishnah says. Now, Mor is going to present a machlekes between Rav and Shmuel on the particulars of this halacha and how it affects other types of eruvin. Itma shitu mevois, as far as a shitu mevois, Rav Amar ein tzarich lezakos. Rav says, contrary to our Mishnah, Rav says you don't have to be mezakeh. You don't have to make a formal zikui for them. Shmuel Amar tzarich lezakos, and Shmuel says, like our Mishnah, that you have to. Eruv tchumim. What about an eruv tchumim? Rav Amar tzarich lezakos. So here it's the opposite. Here Rav says you do have to make a formal zikui, and Shmuel Amar ein tzarich lezakos, and Shmuel says you don't. You don't have to transfer the ownership. So the Rashi explains Rav's shita, that shita mevuah is when the person wants to transfer to the other parties. You don't need a formal zikui, because since he can't carry without everyone joining together, he can't use the movui. Therefore, we know his intent, and we know that when he wants to do it, that he definitely, that's his intent, and he's not going to back out, and therefore you don't need a formal zikui. So that's why Rav says that as far as shita mevuah, where everybody has to join together, and if not, nobody can carry, we know what his intent is, and therefore you don't need a formal zikui. But as far as tchumim is concerned, as far as a tchum is concerned, everybody can have a separate tchum. So therefore, his intent to have somebody else mishtatev in the air for the tchum, perhaps he would change his mind. Perhaps he doesn't really mean it wholeheartedly, because it doesn't affect him. He can go without this other person. He can go al pai mama, wherever the tchum is, whether this other person joins it or not. So therefore, he is not perhaps so firmly resolved, and therefore you need a formal kinyan. But what's pshat in Shmuel? Tosfos, however, explains Shmuel's shita as follows. Yes, it's true that in terms of the desire that he's firmly resolved to include the other people in the eruv, it's true that by shita mevois he has a greater vested interest in that. However, he said by the very nature of the eruv, by shita mevois and by tchumim are different, and therefore the nature of the eruv by the shita mevois would require a kinyan. Whether you hold that the eruv is mishum bais or the eruv is mishum dir or mishum kinyan, nevertheless there's a transfer. There's a transfer of rights, and therefore you have to transfer it through a zikui through the proper means. Therefore, you have to be mezakeh al yedei acher. Alternatively, Tosfos says that the reason that we say by tchumim that you don't have to be mezakeh, because so there's a mitzvah, he's only doing it for a mitzvah. Over there, we can assume that he has a greater interest and desire and a vested interest in transferring ownership, and he's firmly resolved to do it. The third reason Tosfos gives is that, as we'll see in the Gemara shortly, that by shita mevois, a person can be forced to join. But by tchumim, a person cannot be forced. Everybody can choose their own tchum. So we say, therefore, that if he accepts and he has a desire to do it, we say that should suffice instead of a formal kinyan. He can't be forced to do it. If he accepts doing it, he agrees to do it, then we say, therefore, the Amira, that when he says, Seva Aravli, that considered to be, that's choshuv, to be like a kinyan. So Zok the Gemara Bishlam Lishmuel Hachatanan V'Hachaloitanan. Bishlam Shmuel, we understand the basis for his chiluk because in our Mishnah it's talking about shituvuvois and it says that you mezak. But as far as the Tchumim, it doesn't mention that. So we see the basis for his chiluk. Rav my time, but according to Rav, what's the basis to be mechalek the way he says it? More answers Tanoi. It's a machlek is Tanoi. Tomar v'Yirama Rav Ma'aseh v'Chalosa Shel Rabbi Yoshe Shehalcha LeBeis HaMerchas. There is a Ma'aseh with a daughter-in-law of Yoshe. She went to the Beis HaMerchas before Shabbos v'Chashchala, and it became dark, and now it's Shabbos. And the way Rashi learns, she was outside the Tchum. And the way Rashi is learning it is that the bathhouses were frequently outside the Tchum, and therefore she was beyond the Tchum. V'ir v'lo chamoisa, and her mother-in-law made an error for her. So when this Maisa came before Rechia, he said she cannot rely on this error that the mother-in-law made. We'll see why. She cannot rely on it, and it's also for her to come home. He said to him, Bavloi, people from Bavel, you from Bavel, Kol Kachata Machmir Eruvin, you're Kol Kachata Machmir Eruvin so much. Kach Amar Abba Kol Sheish L'Hakel Beirin Hakel. He said that Rav Yossi said, whatever you can be Mekel in Eruvin, you should be Mekel. So you should have been Mekel and allowed her to come. So what was the issue over here? Why did he say that she could not rely on this Eruv? Did the Eruv Mishal Chamoisa Irvila, did the Eruv come from her mother-in-law's food? So if it came from her mother-in-law's food, you don't have to ask permission. She's giving her own food for the Eruv. And so what is the issue? And the reason he said you cannot rely on this because she was not mezakeh, and therefore you see that by Tchum you have to be mezakeh. Or maybe the food was made from not from her mother-in-law, it was from the daughter-in-law's food. And the issue is that the mother-in-law did not have permission to take the daughter-in-law's food. And that's why he said you can't rely on it. He said, and it was explained to me in the name of Rav Yochanan that the case was Mishel Chamoisa Irva, that it was made for the mother-in-law's food. And what was the problem? Mishum delay zixala. And the reason that he said you can't rely on it is because there was no zikui. So you see that as far as Tchumim goes, you see that you have to be mezakeh. So this is a support to show that you have to be mezakeh. He says, Ki matis hasam akev v'zilasum d'sur. When you go over there, go around and go travel to the path of Tzur, Uboy minei Rav Yaakov bar Idi, and ask him what the case was. Ask him what the particulars of this case was. Boy minei asked him, Mishal Chamoisi Erva, Umishum Delay Sechza, Lo Oitam Mishalo Erva, Umishum Shalem Yedaita, Amar Le Mishal Chamoisi Erva La, Umishum Delay Sechza La. You see, he said that that was the issue. It was the issue was the lack of zikui. So you see that you need zikui. And this is the way Rashi explains the case, is that we're talking about Tchumin. As Taisus explains in Rashi, but the Iker Nakud over here, the Iker point of contention is that our Mishnah says that by Fishitu Femuvues that you need zikui. Where does Rav see, what's his basis to argue with that? So Taisus explained that Rashi is learning that we see the case of Tchumim that you need a zikui. That's where he has the basis over here from this case that you need zikui by Tchumim. Now, as far as Chatzeros, Rav Tanu Polig. Rav has a status of a Tana, and Tanu Polig. Omer of Nachman, the Katina of Nachman says, what do we hold? He says, Echad Eruvin Tchumim, Vechad Eruvin Chatzeros, Echad Shitu Vemevuas, Sorach L'Zakais. He says, Rav Nachman says, in all cases, you have to be Mizakeh. He says, you have to, in all cases, be Mizakeh. Boy, Rav Nachman, well, what about Eruv Tavshila? So if you have Yontiv Samach to Shabbos, and as far as Eruvin Tavshilin, which enables you to cook from Yontiv to Shabbos, even though it's for the next day, is this permitted without ziku? Do you have to be mezakeh for the other people, for everyone that is going to rely on this Erev Tavshilin, or do you not have to be mezakeh? So that was the shaila. Erev Tavshilin tzarich l'zakeh soyin tzarich l'zakeh. Amr of Yosef, umayti boyle. What's your kasha? L'shmil lehad Amr of Nachbar Avada Amar Shmuel. Erev Tavshilin tzarich l'zakeh. Could it be that he didn't hear what Shmuel says? He says beferish that Erev Tavshilin tzarich l'zakeh. So what's the shaila? Amr le'abayim pshitu le'shmile. He says it's poshut. It's obvious that he didn't hear it. Ishmile mighty boyle. Because if he did, why does he have a shaila? Amr le'atayruv tchumen nami loy Amr Shmuel ein tzarich l'zakos. But Eruvin tchumen, Shmuel says you don't have to be mezakos for tchumen. V'Amr iyu tzarich l'zakos, and as we just saw, Rav Nachman says that you do have to. So just because Shmuel said it, it doesn't necessarily mean that Rav Nachman would agree with it. He says no. Abai says, in the case over there, is yes, we don't see that he relies on Shmuel totally, but because over there, Pligi Rav Shmuel. There's a machlokes Rav and Shmuel, and he teaches us that we go over the chumras of both. So he paskins both like Rav and Shmuel, so he's machmir, and he does like both of them, and that's why both of them need a zikui. But over here we don't see anyone arguing over here. So therefore, in the absence of anyone saying to the contrary, he certainly would have followed Shmuel. So it must be that he didn't hear that Shmuel said that it's required, otherwise he wouldn't have had a shaila. There was a certain guard. He was guarding the equipment, the weapons. Dovid Shivusa the Rabbi Zera. He was in the neighborhood of Rabbi Zera. They said to him, Oigerla Rishusa. So he was a Nochri. For a Nochri, you have to rent out his Rishus in the Chatzar. He was in their Chatzar, and in order for them to make an Eruv, they had to rent out his Rishus. But Lo Oigerlu, he refused. Also, the coming to Rabbi Zera, they came before Rabbi Zera and asked what to do. Mau Lamegar Midabesu. They said to him, can we rent out the rights from his wife? He said that the wife, the man's wife, can be married without his knowledge. Therefore, just like you can be ma'ariv, join an Erev without the husband's knowledge, here also, as far as the Nakri is concerned, you can rent out his seicher from him without the husband's consent, without his knowledge. How to Zina Davish was a Yehuda Bar Aishia, Omerle, Oyelan, Rishus. They said, similar case, they said, rent out your Rishus, Layagulu, he refused. Also, the comment of Yehuda Bar Aishia, Omerle, Malamegam in the base, so can we rent it out from his wife? He didn't have an answer. Also, the comment of Rav Masna, he also didn't have an answer. Also, the comment of Rav Yehuda, Amarlu Acham Shmuel, Ishta Shalom Marav Midnightam, that an Ishta Shalom could be Ma'arev without his consent, and therefore you are able to do it in this manner. Meisvel asks you a kasha. It says that the women that were ma'ariv or ashituvim without the consent of their husbands, ein eruv an eruv. It's not an eruv. Ein shituv and shituv. It's not an eruv and it's not a shituv. So it doesn't show you that it's not the way that you stated that they can do it without the knowledge, the consent of the husband. There's a chiluk. If they're non-shituv, not joining together, with the Erev or the Shituf, what Aser would prevent the other people from carrying in the Chaser or the Mavoi, then you can do it without the husband's consent. So if they're a regular participant in the Chaser or in the Mavoi, they regularly use this area. So therefore, if they don't participate, nobody can carry over here. Then we can do it without the husband's consent. But if there's in a case, for instance, that there's a Mavoi on each side of them, as Rashi says, there's a Mavoi on each side. Sometimes they use one, sometimes they use the other. But they don't regularly use the one in question. So if they don't join together, the other participants could carry, because they're not considered to be a regular resident of the Chaser or the Mavoi. So in that case, therefore, we don't say you do it without the consent, since it won't aser on them. It's only when it would aser on them, then we say it can be done without their consent. And it's mistaber to say that, because otherwise it would be a stira in Shmuel l'Shmuel. One of the members who regularly joins in the shituf with the Movi, and he didn't, they can come in and take it without Bal Korcha, against his wishes, as long as his wife gives permission. And as long as, as Taisa says, as long as the wife gives him permission, so we mean Bal Korcha, it means with the wife's permission. So it says, Rogel, if he is someone who regularly joins in the Shita, Rogel in Shein, Rogeloi, Shema Mina, therefore we see this chiluk, that if it's someone who is regularly joins in, then you don't need his consent. You can do it with the wife's consent without the husband. But if it's not Rogel, not Lema Messiah, let's bring a raya from this brisa. It says you can force a person to join together and make a lechi and join together with a lechi or kayar for the Movi. So you can force him, a resident, to join together and be mishtatev. So you see that you can force him. So therefore you see that it is possible to force that. Therefore, just like you say, that you can force him to join in the lechi or the kaira, so too you can force to join in with the shituf. Gemara says, no, you can't bring a right from the other. Shiny hasam daleka mechitzas. Over there it's different because there's no mechitzas. The way Rashi explains it over there is we force for the lechi or the kaira because over there that protects the movi. That protects the movi and gives it a mechitza. And therefore, that's more important, that's more necessary, that's more of a need. Therefore, you can force it. But for the sheet of the mavois, you can't. So, I ask a question on Rashi. The lechi kaira is not really a protection. It's somewhat of a heker. It has a din mechitza or a din of a heker, but it's not a real mechitza. It doesn't afford protection. So why should we say that should be the case? Really, in both cases, whether it's the sheet of the mavui or the lechi kaira, it's only to allow to carry in the mavui. Taisa's girsa is shiny hasam deika mechitza. The Rashi's girsa is shiny hasam deleka mechitza. That's the girsa that we have. That there is no mechitza. It's completely open, and therefore it's open on that side where it's open to the Rishus Ram. You need a lechi or kaira to fence it off, to separate it from the Rishus Rabbim. Taisa says the girsa is shiny hasam deika mechitza, meaning we force him. It's not a question of the necessity or not the necessity. The issue is is it effective? Yes, you can force a person for a lechi or kaira because saif calls saif. There's a mechitza, deika mechitza, and a mechitza, even if it's done against a person's will, but the fact is there is a mechitza here, so it helps. But an eruv or a shitov is not a mechitza; it's a joining together. If you didn't join together, it doesn't work. So he learns it in that way. Lishna achriya. Now the Lashon says mitzad shani. From the side, it's different. The Goyen says that this is not the correct girsa because mitzad shiny has no application. He says that the girsa is bezdin shiny. You have no right from there, because over there that we say, yes, we allow you to do it bal karcha, that's if it's done through Bezdin. Through Bezdin, we say it's permitted. But to do unilaterally without the authority of Bezdin, you can't. So for the shituv, you have no raya that you can make a shituv on your own and by forcing one of the residents to contribute. He says you can make a lechi. We're discussing lechi. He says you can make a lechi from the wood of an ashera tree, even though ashera, the tree that they're oivid avodah sarah, they're oivid this tree as avodah sarah, it's also bahana, but you can use this wood for a lechi. Rosh ben Lakish Amar Eisen Kaira Asher. He says you can make the kaira, the crossbeam, from the wood of an Asherah. Manda Amar Kaira Kol Shekain Lechi. The one that says kaira, certainly you can use a lechi, make it a lechi out of it. Manda Amar Lechi, but the one that says lechi, Aval Kaira Loi. But he says the kaira you cannot. What's the difference? In both cases, you're using it for the mitzvah of blocking off, separating the mobi from the Reshus HaRabim. What's the difference? The difference is al kaira loy, because kasuse michtat shivra, because a kaira needs a shir. Something that's also bahana, it's as if it doesn't exist. It's like burnt up. It's like it doesn't have, in the halach sense, it doesn't have significance, so it doesn't have a shir. A kaira has to have a tafach, it has to have a shir. So therefore, something that has to be burnt, also banan, has to be burned, it's not significant, so it's lacking the shear. A lechi doesn't have to have a shear, so therefore this is not chesaron by the lechi.